My name is Dawie Roodt. I'm the Chief Economist at the Efficient Group, and it's my honor to be here this morning at USB's Leaders Angle, and I really feel very at home here. I had a talk this morning about the economy, the global economy, and touch on a couple of things that I think are unsustainable internationally. I also had a look at South Africa's politics, which is a bit of a mess. I also had a look at the South African economy, and that's not doing very well. And I did some controversial research, especially on race in South Africa. And I think the conclusions that I came to actually points to the answers to many of the questions that we have in South Africa. And if you go back a little bit in history, it's interesting to see how we evolved over time and to identify all these amazing breakthroughs that we've had through the millennia. I've decided to start our history 100,000 years ago. Of course, we as humans, we go back much further than that. We go back many millions of years. And 100,000 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers. Private property rights did not exist because there was no such thing as private property rights. If you were lucky 50,000 years ago, you will make it to the ripe old age of about 25. About 60,000 years ago, somewhere there or so, a small group of us left Africa. That was the first major exodus out of Africa. 15,000 years ago, we first domesticated animals. And all of a sudden, a lot of things started to change. Because if you use animals, you start producing a surplus. Something we never had before. A surplus of something. Another massive economic breakthrough happens about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago when we domesticated plants, especially grain, and now we produce a massive surplus, a really big one. And the problem with plants is they don't move around. You have to stick around, you have to wait for the harvest, and while you're sticking around, you can just as well start doing some other stuff. Putting bricks on top of each other, and that's the word civilization, means high, tall buildings. A major breakthrough happened when about also 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, and that was democracy. And then I would argue one of the biggest economic breakthroughs was when we started to send children to school, boys. We've had the Industrial Revolution, some technological stuff like electricity, the internal combustion engine, and I would argue one of the biggest economic breakthroughs happened the past 100 years. And that is when we started sending girls to school. Because what do you do if you send girls to school? Because women are the primary parent, a huge change happened in your society. We don't see it because it takes time for these sort of things to happen. The strongest contraceptive in the world is how long you send your girl children to school. All of a sudden, you double your workforce. Okay, and then now where we are today, I don't know what's going to happen. I think what's going to be in future are things like artificial intelligence. I've got a suspicion things like the virtual world will become more and more important. Or things like virtual currencies like Bitcoin, stuff like that. And I think eventually where the world's going to end up is that you and I, will become the most important people in the world because politicians simply will not be able to keep on controlling us the way that they are doing. There are three groups of people that you have to remember. The one is young people, younger than 16. The other one is old people, older than 65. And the rest is the rest. Let's call them the workers. Now here I have young dependents as a ratio of the workers, of the in-betweens, between old and young. Now the top one is Africa, and the bottom one is some other countries. In the case of Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, there are 0.8 children for every adult. Many other places, that's the world, there are half the number of kids. Now I'm looking at the old people as a ratio of the workers. Now the top one there is the European Union. They have more old people as a ratio to the number of workers than children. And the number that you can see the lines are going up, meaning that the world is getting fewer children and getting more old people. Now what I've done here, look at the children and the old people, total dependence as a ratio of the guys in between. Africa's line looks pretty much the same, and you can clearly see that in most instances, the rich world, the line is starting to pick up over time. Now depending on how old we're going to get, there's a good possibility that in 100 years' time, there will be fewer people on this planet than what we have today. What happens if you become a successful country? And one thing that stands out if you become a successful country is that your people get old. Your life expectancy increases. When a country reaches an average life expectancy of around about 75, between 70 and 80, about 75 years, suddenly there's a slowdown in population growth and it maybe even go into negative. I'm going to look at some stuff, interesting stuff, racial stuff in South Africa. And And I'm going to talk about the 4 races in South Africa. Now, I'm going to call them black and white and colored in Indian. You can call him A, B, C, and D if you want to, or 1, 2, 3, and 4. I don't care. I really don't care. I know there's a major issue about race in South Africa, and I know I'm going to stick my head into a hornet's nest now. Look at the numbers and see if we can somehow see what's going on with us in South Africa and see what we can do to make sure that the future for all of us in South Africa is the best that we possibly can put together for all of us. Okay, now I'm going to use all this information and some of the background I've given you now, population growth and life expectancies and stuff, and I am going to look at life expectancies for the different races in South Africa. I just want to make a comment about coloureds. Coloureds is a very difficult racial group to analyze because coloureds is not a race, it's sort of the rest. Life expectancy for blacks, about 57 years at the moment. It's likely to go to about 75 years, that trigger, that magic number, 75 years in the year 2060. Whites at the moment, just over 70 years, likely to go to about 82 years or so in the year 2060, and the other racial groups over there. The racial composition in South Africa looks as follows. 80% black at the moment, in the year 2060 it will be 85%. Whites just over 8%, in the year 2060 it will be less than 5%. Indians 2.5% currently, less than 2%, and coloureds more or less the same. There's something called a wave. Now the wave, if you go to a poor community, typically what you will find, there are many children, relatively fewer adults, and very few old people. If you put that on a line, it's a line that runs like this. And as this population starts getting more advanced and you start sending your girls to school, they get richer and more successful, the number of kids are gradually getting fewer and the number of old people are getting more. So people start living a little bit more. And this keeps on going and going, and eventually you get to a stage where you have relatively few kids, still relatively few old people, but a lot of people in the middle. A lot of potential workers in the middle. And it's like a wave coming through your population over time. And that thing is called the population dividend. And that is exactly where the Chinese are today. But that is where the Japanese economy was in the 1960s and 70s. And we said the Japanese are going to take over the world. They did not, because this wave washed through the population, and now they are old. Now here I have the different racial groups in South Africa, and you can see all the lines are more or less running in the same direction. Here are the blacks. You can see it's pretty much a straight line. We do not witness a population wave or population dividend in the black society in South Africa. Here are the coloureds. Now it seems as if there could be some sort of thing developing there, but there is no clear wave in a coloured community. Here are the Indians, they're cooking it. Look at that. Look at that amazing wave in the Indian community. And look at the white community. The wave has washed through the community. So it's not only how many children you have, it is also how many old people you have, but it's also how many people are employed in your household. Because if somebody is unemployed in your household, that person is a dependent. So I'm going to change this dependency ratios and make the unemployed people dependents. Also, if you have the after-school qualification, any kind of after-school qualification, your income at least doubles. Which means, if you have somebody in your household with a qualification after matric, that person, it's like having an extra worker, at least, in your community. So I'm going to calculate the new dependency ratio. I want to include all these variables. Dependents, old and young, unemployment and qualifications. That's what I'm going to do. But the unemployment levels amongst coloureds and blacks are much, much higher than amongst the Indians and whites. Whites' unemployment level is very, very low. This is the qualifications for the different races. A huge increase in black qualifications recently, but as a percentage, black qualifications are still very low as a percentage of the population, and coloureds, there's the Indians and the whites are doing very well. The dependency ratio for blacks came down to 0.56, where it is today, or 0.5 or so, and the main reason for that is because they're having fewer children in the black community. If we adjust it for unemployment, what's going to happen to the black community, and this is what happens. There's a significant increase in the number of dependents in the black community because they have very high levels of unemployment. If now you adjust it further for qualifications, it improves a little bit, but not much, because the qualification levels for blacks are still very low. Now my thesis is, as your dependency ratio comes down, your income generating capacity goes up. Now I'm going to test this. Here it is. That's my dependency ratio coming down for blacks, and that's the income for blacks going up. So my thesis seems to hold for blacks. Let's have a look at the colored dependency ratio. That's a normal colored dependency ratio. The colored dependency ratio is below that of blacks. Also come a significant fall in colored dependency ratio, mostly because of fewer children. If you adjust that for unemployment, it goes up quite sharply. And again, if you adjust that for qualifications, it's come down a little bit, but not by much. And if you test my thesis against falling dependency ratio compared to a rising income, this is what it looks like. There's a falling dependency ratio and an increase in income for coloreds. Let's have a look at the Indian dependency ratio. There's the Indian dependency ratio. There's a significant fall in the Indian dependency ratio, but you can clearly see it starts picking up because they're gradually getting older, the Indians. And if you can adjust that for qualifications, it comes down quite sharply because their qualifications are really good and improving quite dramatically. So the Indians are doing very, very well. And if you test that dependency against income, not only is the dependency ratio coming down quite sharply, the income is going up very sharply. If you test that for the whites, and that dependency ratio looks completely different. It goes up. The other ones are coming down. And the reason why it goes up is because whites are getting older. If you adjust that for unemployment, look at that. Because the unemployment levels are very, very low for whites. And if you adjust it for qualifications, it falls even further because they've got amazing qualifications. So what the whites are doing, they're postponing the inevitable. The inevitable is that we are getting older. Now I'm going to have a look at income, the different incomes. I'm not going to explain that. This is a Gini coefficient. Now the Gini coefficient, what it tells you is that if you have a high Gini coefficient, and if you have a Gini coefficient of 1, it's measured between 0 and 1. If you have a Gini coefficient at 1, it means that one guy takes all the income in the society. If you have a Gini coefficient of 0, it means all income is equally distributed in the society. That's what it means. So a high Gini coefficient is a skewed income distribution, and a low Gini coefficient is a more equal Gini coefficient. We have black Gini coefficient fairly high in South Africa. Reason number 1 is because unemployment is very high amongst blacks. Reason number 2, we have more than 3 million people, 3.2 million people working for the state in South Africa. So we've got, say, roughly 2.5 million blacks working for the state in South Africa. They are hopelessly overpaid, the civil servants. The third reason why the black Gini coefficient is on the high side is because a few individual blacks get the benefit of BEE, and they serve on all the boards of all the companies, and you get these very, very wealthy blacks. And then different other racial groups in between, and a white racial group at the bottom with a much lower Gini coefficient. But this is the per capita GDP of the different races. Let's just rephrase that. Let's call it the income of the different races in South Africa. The whites, as you can see, $60,000 is 6 times higher than that of black, let's call it income in South Africa. It's double that of Indians, and significantly more than coloreds as well. How do blacks in South Africa compare to sub-Sahara African blacks, as an example? In 1996, the average black in South Africa's income was 2.2 times that of a sub-Sahara African income. Subsequently, it's come down, and that's to 2014, and currently the average black in South Africa's income is just below 1.8 times that of the average black in sub-Sahara Africa. Let's have a look at Indians. In 1996, the average Indian in South Africa's income was 8 times that of the average Indian in India, and today it's about 5 times. That's how do the whites compare, and I'm comparing the whites to the white countries in the empire. The average income on a purchasing power parity basis is 1.4 times that of the average white in those countries, or citizen in those countries. But if you adjust it for market exchange rates, it is about 0.6 that of the whites in those different countries. So the whites in South Africa has got a high living standard because of the weak currency. So what's wrong with blacks? They have too many dependents. And what I mean with dependents, it's a combination of those 4 factors. The skills development lags behind. That's a major, that's the biggest problem in South Africa, especially for black girls. That's where we have to put all our energy into. We need to improve access to jobs. Don't give jobs, but you cannot prevent people from taking jobs. Because a good job, to get a good job, you need to get a job first. Coloreds pretty much the same, but I've mentioned earlier, coloreds is not a race, it's sort of the default group. In case of whites, whites are getting old, that's the biggest problem. The income is falling. What is wrong with the Indians? Nothing. The Indians are absolutely on a sweet spot. Okay, that's my hele story. Dankie.